The book I have in front of me is called Uncovering the Mysteries of Multiple Personality Disorders. I quote, "Satanic ritual abuse is much more terrible a kind of abuse because it causes disassociation in a much higher percentage of its victims, maybe as high as 75% or more." What is disassociation? Why does satanic ritual abuse cause it? And what is religious abuse? I quote, "Any disassociator's system of altars will be damaged by being falsely led to believe that one or more of them are evil spirits. Altars cannot be erased, and they cannot be cast out." What are altars? What is disassociation? What's all this talk about? What are multiple personalities? My guest today, Dr. James Friesen, author of the book Uncovering the Mysteries of Multiple Personality Disorders. And Dr. Friesen, I have to tell you, out of all the books that I've read and all the people that I've talked to, this is probably the most non-adversarial setting I've ever entered into. People know me as somebody who goes for the jugular, pulls people out in the open, kicking and screaming to make them defend what they do. I don't want to disappoint you. This will not be vintage Bob Larson, and my reputation will do no good to precede me. I like you. I love your book. And we're going to have a friendly talk today, sir, about multiple personalities, how they happen, and what leaders in the Christian community and therapists and Christian counselors and pastors can do to help out these folks. I suppose the most logical place to begin is a simple definition. We're going to use words like altars, disassociation. Please, in layman's language, in a simple nutshell, what is, as we will refer to it, MPD, and what are the factors influencing it?
Okay. I must say I'm a lucky person to not be in an adversarial position, because as you've read the book, Bob, and you know that I have gone way out on the limb. I have said some things that are pretty hard to defend about the power of God, about satanic abuse, about multiple personality, and I'm setting myself up to be an open target.
Well, I've already been shot at by some of the best of them, so I understand where the bullet holes are. I'll help to hide you.
Okay. And so I appreciate your wholehearted endorsement. That's a nice thing. But, you know, this book started out, when I started writing it, to be simply a treatment book, how to work with a multiple personality from a psychological and a spiritual framework. You know, both factors involved. And it turned out to have some documentary. I needed to document, you know, multiple personality and satanic abuse and spiritual warfare, for that matter. And so the first 3 chapters have turned out to be documentaries on those 3 and how I came to them. Uncovering the Mystery of MPD could be a little bit autobiographical, you know, in its title, how I uncovered the mysteries for myself of those 3 areas. But it also can be uncovering the mystery for the reader. In fact, my publishers and I made special attempts to be non-technical about the book so that it can be understandable to the average reader. And so with that in mind, I will tell you what some of the basics are in a nutshell. Dissociation is a type of forgetting. It's the type of forgetting that is complete. Almost all the time, the first time dissociation is used is at a very early age. It is the best defense mechanism God created. It is the most effective, and if a young child, let's say 3 or 4 years old, is traumatized, real shockingly or terrifyingly or brutally hurt, and the child has enough creativity, that child can say kind of inwardly and create the notion that didn't really happen to me, it happened to somebody else, and I'll pretend to not know that person, and pretty soon, like within a couple of seconds, it will be completely forgotten, 100% forgotten, and that's dissociation. The child can literally not know what happened just a few minutes before.
Now, as I've talked on the air and live, and many of my listeners have heard me converse directly with multiple personalities, some of them are absolutely confounded by the fact that one personality in a body can be so distinct from the other personality, speak differently, act differently, emote differently, and sometimes we can get real complicated here, but sometimes there's cross knowledge from one personality to the other. Sometimes there isn't. They're totally distinct. They don't know what the other personality is thinking or has done or anything about them. And it's hard for the audience to understand, how can that happen in one person? Is the mind complex enough to accomplish that?
Oh, yeah. If the child who's just been traumatized can have total forgetting of what just happened, that part of the child doesn't know about it, but the part that was traumatized does know about it. So it's not really forgotten. It's just forgotten to, let's say, the host child.
So what happens is part of that child's mind splits off where the trauma occurred so that another part of that child emotionally can get on with life without having to carry on the horror throughout the entire mental processes of that body and that person, right?
You got it. I think a good way to understand it is sort of the same way you would understand computers. You know, computers store things in files, and you can think of each let's say, alternate personality. That's the whole title, an alternate personality. We happily call them alters. But the alter will have a file, and it will be a file, and it will store certain memories and certain information. And with that storage comes feelings, bodily experiences, and the actual memory of the events. And it all goes into that file. And when the file is deaccessed, it's forgotten. It's not known by the other files. So if you're in, let's say, the main personality, some people call it a host personality, and I think it's easy to think of it if you use that term. Let's say you're in the host personality. That may have access to 5 or 6 files, but there are 10 or more other files that it doesn't have access to. So there's lots of information that's contained somewhere else in the person's brain that are unable for the host personality to get into.
Now,
so with therapy, we teach the person how to take down the barriers between the files and start to access each other.
And you made a statement a while ago that I want to pick up on.
Okay.
You talked about this being a gift. I have made the statement on the air, and I have absolutely been crucified for this publicly by many in the Christian community, that multiple personality disorders is not necessarily a dysfunctional form of mental illness, but in fact it is a God-given mind-coping mechanism for people who have been subjected to traumatic horror to be able to continue functioning as a living being without their minds cracking and without committing suicide. Now, I want to add to that you direct a counseling center, that you are an adjunct professor at Fuller Graduate School of Psychology, that you're a licensed psychologist with a graduate degree and a licensed minister. So, you know, if Bob Larson, author and talk show host, says this is a gift of God and it blows people's minds, I'd like to know where you come from in regards to this. Is this something that God in his graciousness has gifted people with so that they can maintain their sanity, awaiting the time when you, me, or someone else steps in to offer them remedial hope?
Oh, yeah. It's most useful for a child to use dissociation, and it is definitely a gift for a child to not have to grow up knowing about the awful things that have happened. Most often, sexual abuse and incestuous relationships are relegated to one of these alters and forgotten, so that the youngster growing up has been abused, maybe even by a family member, in horrible ways, but not know about it. Now, the host personality that doesn't know about the abuse doesn't have to carry around the baggage and the weight of knowing all that bad stuff. And it has a real kind of naive, happy-go-lucky sense about life and can continue to develop and mature in healthy ways. But if it hadn't been able to forget those bad things that happened and would remember them, then It wouldn't be able to concentrate during school. It wouldn't have the sense of freedom to explore, and would grow up a lot less healthy. So it's a gift in that it allows the natural talents of the child to emerge, so that by the time they get to adulthood, they're operating out of their full God-given potential. But it does lose its effectiveness in early adulthood. By the age of 25 or 30, there is enough disruption that results from dissociation.
No, let me jump in there because so many of the victims of satanic ritual abuse who have come our way for help, who are involved in multiple personality dissociation, are in fact in their early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often wondered myself psychologically why there seems to be a key in those early 20s to mid-20 years, and certainly seldom ever beyond 30. That seems to be when it triggers. It often is not triggered in the teen years, but it's triggered in early adulthood. You're saying that this is the point at which the dissociative abilities don't function quite so readily, and then the mind keeps searching. The mind starts searching out a way to get the truth out.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably true. The dissociative symptoms become more rigid as the person gets older.
Mm-hmm.
They're more fluid. It's harder to tell a switch between personalities for a child, and it's harder to tell it for a teenager. And early adulthood, you can start to see it a little bit more easily, but as they get into 25 to 30, you can start to see the switch more easily. The personalities are becoming more set, and their differences are becoming more obvious. And if there's amnesia, in other words, the host personality doesn't know some of the personalities that are used, there'll be blank spots showing up in the middle of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the discontinuity for time and the discontinuity of identity, and people saying, you said this a few minutes ago, how come you're not saying it now? And the person doesn't remember having said it.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are very upsetting. And so it can be pretty well ignored and avoided, and fluidity and all that stuff can happen. But, 25 or 30, by that time they haven't been able to keep a job for very long, and they're starting to have to deal with the reality of they're not going where they want to go.
You deal with this issue in your book of losing time, and my dealing with, as you just alluded to it, my dealing with MPD cases as they get older, this becomes one of the most frightening things for them, because as they will tell me, it's like, where was I when this happened? And one of the worst aspects of that is if there are self-destructive multiple personalities, often when the host or some of the dominant personalities are out, there may be self-inflicted damage or other types of things done by some of the destructive personalities. Then the person comes to, and I think in several cases, they come to, they may find themselves burned, cut, scarred, or in places where they would not normally be. I mean, one of the host personality is a fine Christian. They come to and they're in a bar. Crazy things can happen to them. And it eventually becomes very frightening to them.
Oh, I would say it's horrifying. I mean, to just wake up someplace, like you were saying, with some kind of an injury inflicted on them and having no knowledge of how that happened, that just blows them away. And it's horrifying. And of course, you can tell that they would want to do everything they can to not ever let that happen again. They become reclusive and seclusive and self-protective, to manage so that those things don't recur. It's just exceedingly frightful. It's terrifying, and therapy itself is very tough. Let me give you an example on Monday. We're talking about 2 days ago. One person that I've been working with for a while, she was starting to recognize her differentness and her personalities. Hadn't got into any that were fully amnesic, They were just all kind of interconnected. They knew each other, sort of, but I had a sense that there was more underneath. There might be some that were totally amnesic. There would be loss of time. She read my book, which had just been out for a couple of weeks then. It's only been out for a month at the time today. But she read the book, and having read it, a lot of her personalities, which had been buried, started to come out because they got permission. They said, "Oh, it's okay to be out. It's okay to be recognized." And in that session just 2 days ago, one personality came out that thought she was 17 years old, and she's really 41. So that person had been quiet for 24 years. And it was really hard, because when she came out and her friend was sitting right next to her longtime friend was sitting right next to her, I asked her, what year it was, and she said it's 1977. And I said, well, how old do you think you are? And she said, I'm 17. And do you know about your husband? Do you know about your children? And she said, you must be kidding me. That was a totally separated part.
I want to talk just for a moment about, let's get real technical here for a second, the diagnostic definition of MPD. And you deal with this in your book. It's two or more distinct personalities, each of which is dominant at a particular time. Secondly, the personality that's dominant at a particular time determines the behavior at that moment. And thirdly, each of these individual personalities is complex and integrated in its own unique behavior patterns. Now, people who have listened to Talkback and have heard some of these cases on the air have literally heard these people flip back and forth, sometimes jumping over age spans of 10 to 15 years differential. Totally different emotive and intellectual capacities. In fact, just earlier today on the broadcast, I was talking with one of these cases, and at one point there was this 20-year-old or so personality talking very bright and animated. The next minute I'm talking to a 4-year-old. Diagnostically speaking, this business of the distinction of these personalities, how is it kept straight within the mind of that person? How can they make those flips, complete leaps across time, across emotive capacities and so on? How are they able to do that?
Well, I wish I could give you the neurological explanation. I don't think I've got that one yet, but I think I can set up a model that illustrates it. It's as though when the person wakes up in the morning, they tend to just kind of lie there quietly in bed and imagine what's going to happen during the day, and the personalities kind of line up inside of them. They know that I'm going to be needed at 10 o'clock, I'm going to be needed when I get to church at 2 in the afternoon, or something like that. And they kind of mock up the outlay for the day. And it's like there's a rotating glass door, and one personality is in charge at a time. So then the host gets up out of bed and, does whatever she has to do in the morning in terms of getting ready and getting breakfasts and whatever household duties. And then when she walks out the door, another personality rotates through the revolving door, and the one out front goes back. And then on the way to work or wherever they're going, that personality is in charge. And the circumstance determines who's next. And if they know what the circumstances are going to be, they can pretty well line up which personality is going to be next. But usually by the middle of the afternoon, there may be some alteration in the schedule that is unanticipated, and the wrong person comes out based on a circumstance. Let's say a car door slams behind them when they're walking down and frightens them, and a startled child comes lurching out through the door, and then the lineup is all messed up. And when that hurt child is out there on the street kind of disoriented and lost, they don't know how to get home. And literally they don't know where they are until and then maybe a protector will come out, and they drive home and go to bed, and that's the end of the day, and they have to wait until the next day to get the lineup going again. I want to emphasize, when the personalities are lined up like that, they're trying to have a sense of internal control, but they are really controlled by the environment they are in. External control. They don't have the ability to choose which personality is going to be out next. The personalities respond to the need, whether it is at work, at home, at church, or special cases like when they're driving down the highway. A certain song may come on the radio, and they will revert to the age at which they knew that song. And maybe a young personality will be driving and won't know how to drive very well, and they may have a crash.
Well, actually, I have dealt with cases like that, and one particular one that I remember, there was an underage personality that would come through periodically behind the wheel of an automobile and become terrified at not knowing how to drive. Now,
That's right.
yeah, I tell people about this on my show, and people, they're incredulous. It's kind of like you've got to be there to see it, to believe it. I want to touch on so much. Oh, there's so much I want to talk to you about. But one of the issues that I've got to make sure we leap into early, that cannot be avoided, it's the major issue. At least I find as far as the Christian community is concerned. And I want to quote from your book, section where you talk about religious abuse. A problem that can lead to therapeutic failure is religious abuse. To be accused of being infested with demons is probably one of the most damaging things I can think of. The notion that evil spirits can control our lives can produce feelings of extreme helplessness and hopelessness. My life is not in my hands if I'm possessed. The direction of multiple personality disorder therapy should be toward establishing self-control, and the accusation of spirit possession seriously contradicts that direction. Now, the thing that I do appreciate about you is that you do believe in evil spirits. You do acknowledge and apparently therapeutically deal with the issues of exorcism, as I have personally. And in my experience, I've dealt with situations where there are sometimes only alters and MPDs, others where it's only demons, sometimes where it's both, and sometimes where you actually have a demon imitating an altar to hide behind the facade of the altar, and you have to get through the altar and get it integrated to get to the demon, and it gets incredibly complicated. But the most damaging thing is when I sit down in front of someone that I immediately recognize as multiple personality case, and I see that this person is incredibly emotionally scarred because they have been through these screaming, yelling, hollering, traumatic, emotionally sensational exorcism episodes, and their minds are mush, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know who they are. So let's, for a moment, I hope you're agreeing with what I've said thus far.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Let's, for a moment, I'm going to try to set aside my hurt and some of my anger toward the Christian community that just refuses to deal with this issue rationally, and let's try to help some of these pastors and Christian leaders who are listening to us right now.
Okay.
Let's try to help them distinguish between altars and demons. I've got my definition. I'm anxious to hear yours in a nutshell. What is the way that they distinguish the two? And then when they know that it's an altar and not a demon, how do they proceed? Or if they know it's a demon, how do they proceed? That's a tall order and a short answer, but try it.
Well, let me introduce this by sharing with you about a month ago, or a little bit more than that now, I guess. Chuck Kraft, who wrote Christianity with Power, a very wonderful professor and writer, man with great gifts in healing, called me up and said, I got to come in and talk with you. I understand you know about MPD. So he came in and we talked for 3 hours. It was great. We were going to go out to lunch, but we didn't because we were just so full of stuff to tell each other. We never got out the door. And he said that in one of the teams that he knows of, they had been exercising demons in one individual, and they just couldn't get one to leave, although they were using the right formulas and the right gifts and all that. But it didn't work. And so they sent this person to Dr. Kraft. And when she came in, no sooner did she get in the door, but he saw kind of a switch to a new personality. And the new personality said to him, Dr. Kraft, will you tell these people to quit exercising me? I am not a demon. I am a personality. And there was religious abuse. But happily, the personality was strong enough to not believe them, that the Christians who were telling it that it was a demon.
So how does that person, how is Pastor Joe of the First Baptist or First Presbyterian Church, if he runs into this, to know what the difference is? How does he keep from just saying this person's crazy or this is demons or whatever?
Yeah. Well, it's enough, at least for a first step, to recognize how tough it is. I mean, it could be either. One of the things that bothers me most is that traditional ways that people have used to discern demons is by external things like a blink of the eye or a twitch of the neck or a shrug of the shoulders, and they go, "Ha, it's a demon, let's get him." And those are the same kinds of things which indicate a switch in personalities. So if the same kind of a thing indicates either, it'd be real important to pray and to keep in mind that you don't know which is which until you start examining it. And so I have, on page 222 of my book, listed in Figure 6 a number of ways which people can help discern which is which. But I think the key is that I cannot relate to a demon. I can't get a conversation going with a demon. And if I start to get a sense of ongoing interestedness, in the personality, it's going to be a personality. Demons will tend to use one or two words and really harsh feelings, and then they're gone.
Would it be appropriate to say, and it just occurs to me that from my own experience, if you are truly therapeutically loving that person, if you are empathizing with them, reaching out to them with compassion, you're going to get a totally different reaction from a demon than you are from the altar, because the altar is looking for someone to love them and accept them and affirm them.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas the demon, if you start doing that, is going to be incredibly antagonistic, start referring in the third person to the victim, and kind of force its own hand. Is not love and compassion and empathy the thing that's really going to tip the balances, because the altar will be receptive to it and the demon won't?
Absolutely. Although certain kinds of personalities or certain personalities are harder to love than others, some of them are downright antagonistic at the beginning.
Well, I had one recently try to take a knife and stab me. And I had to make, as I was restraining this person, a very serious decision. Is this a demon I'm dealing with, or is this an altar? And as I began to talk with the altar, it was obvious that the horror of the abuse, the terrible brainwashing, and the triggers that had been implanted, it was very obvious that this was an incredible reservoir of hate and anger and not evil. And I guess, Dr. Friesen, the only thing I can say at that point is there is where spiritual discernment really has to come into operation.
Oh, absolutely. I try and maintain an attitude of prayer during a session, and if we get a chance, we'll pray in the middle of the session or whenever we find it necessary, and I never go into the process of trying to discern whether it's a personality or a demon outside of a warfare prayer and a protection prayer, and clear, open, asking God to guide us to the truth, and so far, I'm not aware of any time that we've ended up thinking a demon was a personality or vice versa. God seems to always lead us to the right answer.
Now, this whole issue of multiple personalities seems so highly exotic, but as you point out in your book, it's not really all that strange that dissociative abilities are an inherited biological factor, that everyone to some extent has it, and as you point out in your book, certain percentages of people are highly gifted with that ability to fantasize or disassociate. So we shouldn't look at these people as though they are some kind of strange creatures who have mental quirks the rest of us don't have. In fact, all of us, given the right circumstances of torment, torture, extreme abuse, could react the same, could we not?
Oh, yeah, no question about it. In fact, I was just thinking today that I'm working with 3 people who are dissociators who are already therapists or in graduate school for becoming a therapist. And, they're really gifted. And when they're in their therapy personalities or working as a therapist, they're very gifted. They're very bright. And there's nothing sluggish or subpar about them. Contrarily, they are well above average. The brightness and the creativity of these folks never ceases to amaze me.
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn the cassette over at this point for the continuation of the message on Side 2.
Let me give you an illustration of that myself, and I'd be interested in your reactions to it. One particular case we dealt with involved twin altars.
Okay.
And they're very artistic, and I've watched them physically do this. I've watched them create a painting, a work of art, using both hands ambidextrously. One hand going one direction, the other hand going the other direction, both altars operating simultaneously, and painting an exact mirror on each side of the canvas of what's on the other side, each hand moving oppositely, and then signing it at the bottom, the left hand going left, the right hand going right, one hand writing as a hand normally would, the other writing backwards, in absolute mirror-perfect image. Please, you're the psychologist. It baffled me. Tell me how that can be.
Well, as you were saying a minute ago, these people are incredibly talented and creative. And secondarily, another factor is that MPD is a create-your-own disorder. In other words, they will be whatever they need to be safe. All of the time, it starts in trauma. 95% of the time, it looks like it starts in real serious trauma preschool. So these are people who, as young children, were hurt seriously and often. And so they have had to carefully protect themselves on a regular basis throughout their childhood and on into adulthood. And the need for continuing protection has taken the form of being whatever they need to be in any given situation. And since they are all very creative, they can turn out practically any personality that is needed for a given occasion. And so they've got a wide cast of characters, and if they haven't got one to fit the situation, they can create one too. And so if they need to be an artist, they can be an artist, and they can develop that skill to the nth degree. They're very artistic, and music and dance, it never ceases to amaze me.
Help me out of some hot water here, I hope. I got myself into some more hot water on the air in dealing with multiple personality cases of contending that in bringing a ritual abuse victim to Christ who's developed multiple personalities, it sometimes involves multiple conversions, that each personality, in effect, or most of them, in effect, have to come to Christ their own way, their own time, and a part of the integration process is literally winning to Christ each of the altars. Now, when I've said that, people look at me like, we got one body here. Doesn't the Holy Spirit come in to the person when they come to Christ? Why are you insisting you got to go back and share the gospel with each one of these? And as I've explained, and I've illustrated on the air, there are altars in there that even though another altar has received Christ, that altar in there doesn't even understand the gospel. I have to start from point zero and win their trust and lead them to the Lord. Now, you're the licensed minister here. Has that been your experience? If it is, how do we handle that theologically? Because I've had pastors say to me, no way, Jose, somebody comes to Jesus, they come to Jesus, that's it.
Okay. Well, the Sunday go-to-meeting Christian, is he a Christian only on Sundays, or is he a Christian the rest of the week?
Mm-hmm.
I think that within our culture there's an almost automatic mindset, that when you're at work, you play one persona, and, when you're at the ballpark, you play another persona, and when you're at church, you play another persona, or a character, or an ego state, or any number of ways to term that. But you can notice different ways of operating at different times.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you let out a bunch of swear words when you're at the ballpark, does that make you any less a Christian? Mm-hmm. I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly isn't the kind of a Christian life that is the fullest. Mm-hmm. In Luke 11, 34 to 36, Jesus talks about letting his light shine into all of our lives. And I think that's really what I'm after, having the light of Jesus be shown in all of their lives. And these people who have amnesic personalities, some of the personalities have no idea who Jesus is.
Mm-hmm. They
don't know him, and letting his light shine on them strengthens the Christian life of the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give an example from that person I was seeing on Monday night.
Mm-hmm.
I was so pressed all day long on Monday, and I couldn't figure out why. I was not operating at high rate, and I didn't know, and I was praying, and I was saying, as our pastor had taught us on Sunday, Moses, he can't do it, but God is with him.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, and I kept saying to him all day long, God, you are with me. Keep working with me. And my last therapy session of the evening turned out to be this person who had their system had come out and needed, as I said a few minutes before, to expose all the different parts. And one of them had been 17 years old, and she had been abused for years by a youth group leader. We're talking about sexual affair with a married youth group leader in a church setting.
Mm-hmm.
And that personality was demonized. And it had to be relieved of the demon. We rebuked it in the name of Jesus, and the demon left, and it was a lot better off. And there was another personality that had 3 other demons. And until those demons had been cast away from those 2 personalities would not talk about Jesus. They would not let us talk with them about the merits of coming to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And once the demons had left, they asked Jesus to shine his light on them too. And I can hardly wait till our next session, because it looks like the whole system now, a whole system of personalities, is in a much better position in relation to Jesus. So she had. She was a Christian. There's no question in my mind about
Mm-hmm.
that. But parts of her personalities didn't know about Jesus yet. And now that they've come to Christ, the speed of her healing is going to really go nicely.
I have had multiple personality people say to me, why do you want to integrate us? We don't want to be integrated. You're going to kill us if you take away our dissociative abilities. Don't you understand? I'm real. I'm a person. I don't want to die. I don't want to fuse. Therapeutically speaking, is fusion, complete, total fusion to a holistic state, and from a spiritual standpoint to a spiritually holistic state, is that always the goal? What has been your experience there? What should we be looking for in this process of healing?
I don't know of any serious therapists who've had any decent amount of experience in multiple personality that still allow that personalities should be left unintegrated.
Mm-hmm.
That it seems a given that the best way for life to go on is with the fewest disruptions.
Mm-hmm.
And so to eliminate the amnesia, to get a joining or a uniting of power, of coping power, of understanding of spiritual unity, is the way God wants us to operate. He wants to be in the center of our life and have all of our powers aligned with Him. And if some of them are split off, they can't be working together with the rest of us. So but I can't hit these people over the head with that notion, especially early in treatment.
Mm-hmm.
The goal, and I have these little ellipses cut out, little paper ellipses,
Mm-hmm.
and I put them on a desk in front of me, and I show how they're separate, and I say, this is like your personalities. And then I gather them together, and they start to overlap,
Mm-hmm.
and pretty soon they can see that when they're all united like that, they still retain all of their paper. They haven't lost anything except they're united. And I tell them, it's important to train and to inform these people that it's natural to fear you're going to die if you get joined up with the others. and it's obvious that you're going to think you've lost a friend if they get joined up or fused or integrated. And that's okay. But in the end, it's like each one of you is an X-ray. And if you take the X-rays and you superimpose them on each other and lay them one on top of the other and look through them all, you can see that you haven't lost any of them, and yet you've got them all united. And that's what you've got with unity. All of them have come together, none of them has been lost, and all of them are available at any one time. It doesn't take effort to switch over to another part of you to access that power. It's all right there.
Let's talk about satanic ritual abuse for a moment. This is an area that this particular ministry has pioneered to some extent. We've been in the forefront of bringing this to the attention of the country. My latest book, a novel called Dead Air, deals with intervention into a secret cult that is practicing this sort of thing. We have established here through our Compassion Connection a national ritual abuse survivors support group through teleconferencing on a nationwide basis. And yet, and I've worked personally with psychiatrists and psychologists all over the country, and both inpatient as well as outpatient treatment programs. I am eminently aware of what's going on in this area, and I guess, sir, I'm shocked. You deal with this, by the way, so well in your book. I'm shocked when I still get from the Christian community this reaction of, you're a hysteria monger. This isn't real. Prove it. This is just the latest bandwagon, whatever. From a therapeutic standpoint, from a psychologist who is dealing with this on a daily basis, what can you say to credibly enlighten the Christian community out there to understand that this is not some sensationalistic, overblown hype, that there are tens of thousands of people out there who have been through satanic ritual abuse who need the loving, compassionate concern of the Christian community who will hear their stories and help them?
Well, I think we have to look at the Old Testament accounts of where the people who served Baal were told to sacrifice their children to Baal, and how Jehovah was so much against that. There was satanic abuse going on in the Old Testament in the cultures around Israel. And God took a stand in his people and his prophets against those who served gods who sacrificed their sons. And I've alluded to this in my book, too. I've mentioned a lot of places where it's mentioned in the Old Testament in my book. But it goes back to that era, and it has been continuing ever since. Some psychologists did some research and found accounts of satanic ritual abuse in the 3rd century. And all the elements of ritual abuse that are being reported today were present back then in the 3rd century, with the one exception being the use of mind-altering drugs. At present, if you think that this is just a fad, it's got a 4,000-year history at least. And it's not a tiny thread in human history. And it's one that is by far the most divisive issue I have found. It splits congregations. It has the potential to split Christian therapy groups, Christian families, lawyers. They will take emotionally charged positions on either side, and it just wrecks organizations such as the International Society for the Study of Multiple Personality and Dissociation. There's a lot of question whether this could actually be happening, despite the fact that most of the therapists are dealing with people who say this is happening. And it is becoming pretty hard to deal with. And I think it becomes a real important issue for that organization to deal with it carefully and correctly. This is even so emotional for me that I have a hard time with it, because people who I see on a regular basis have told me of the things they have seen. as youngsters and growing up. And it makes me sick. I get physically ill because of the horror scenes they have described. And it doesn't please me for them to make these stories up for me. They aren't doing it to benefit me. And I can't imagine why they would want to come up with this kind of creation if it's not true. They actually remember what happened. Why shouldn't I believe them?
Well, I've seen this happen again and again myself, and as I've related in my book, some stereotypical examples of this sort of thing, I've been quite surprised at the reaction of the religious community to it. I've dealt with things like colonization, like animal rebirthing ceremonies, some pretty horrible stuff. I've been castigated now as being the creator of a genre of, quote, Christian pornography, end quote, for daring to tell these stories. My fear is that there will be a religiously McCarthyite reaction to what you and I and others are trying to say, to the extent that the survivors who most desperately need to believe and speak out will be driven back into hiding. What can those courageous Christians in leadership positions best do to prevent this from happening? What can we do to make sure that this issue stays in the open?
Well, I think we need to keep preaching the truth, and we'll go the right direction if we keep following the Lord's leading and asking for truth and guidance. In one of the chapters in my book, I've mentioned a man, Pastor Moses. That's not his real name, but that's okay. He called me up and gave me his story, and it goes something like this, although it's more elaborate in the book. One of the people who he was seeing was active in a satanic coven, not wanting to be active in it, but stuck in it. And so she came to him and his church to get out of it. And through the threats and the infighting of the coven and the power of prayer from the church united behind her, prayed for her, and prayed against the coven. The coven was split up, and she was released. And it's a wonderful story. I really believe that when churches are given the opportunity to support a victim of satanic abuse who wants to become a believer and wants to turn every area of his or her life over to the Lord, and they get behind and support this person, God will bless their church. Their church will grow in spiritual maturity, and it will be good for the church. A church that is afraid of this stuff, is run by fear, I don't think is on the right track, because God doesn't work out of a spirit of fear. Love, power, you know what I'm talking about? Strong mind. God has not given us a spirit of fear, and I am not afraid of what's going to happen to me because I have written an expose on satanic ritual abuse, because I believe that the power of God will keep me safe and will be used to release a lot of prisoners.
There's so much in your book that we're not going to have time to cover, and that I strongly recommend people to read the 8 Steps of Exorcism. My goodness, this is a case study that's just really excellent. The issues of ritual marriage, of family spirits, the recruitment techniques that many of these groups are practicing with existing preschools, the ability to identify demons and altars. There is just so much valuable information that you have in here, but in the few moments remain, just take a minute, if you will. Pastor so-and-so is sitting there, he's got a normal counseling session, he thinks, and all of a sudden a voice speaks and says something that's disassociative from the person he was talking to. And as a result of having heard this conversation between you and me, he says, is this what I'm dealing with? What are 2 or 3 things he ought to do if he's a pastor, counselor, a Christian leader, in some type of therapeutic session, at that point, to help that person?
Well, I think he needs to either make a decision to become a specialist in the field or refer the person to somebody who is.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you can't make a half-hearted effort at helping these people. They've been through intense suffering, and they need a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do a half-hearted job, and you can't make a short-term commitment. And if you're going to become a specialist in this area, make sure that you're not the only one. You're part of a team, 3 or 4 other people who are also doing a lot of reading. You do some reading, have them do some reading. You keep sharing your problems with each other. Attend a couple of conferences. Join the International Society for the Study of Multiple Personality and Dissociation, because that's the only place where you can get the latest developments and the latest research. Make a commitment to grow. And make a commitment to this person that you're going to help them and you're going to be willing to learn to grow and believe what they say and work with them on inviting God in on a regular basis to keep you on track, to keep you from getting sidetracked, to keep presenting you with the problems that need to be approached, and through His power, make a commitment that you're going to work together.
There are, just in closing here, a couple of things that you bring out which I think are so important for us to understand. One of these, the difficulties with the justice system. The fact that one of the reasons it's hard to get this issue before the public is because, first of all, if you're bringing up Satanism, as you point out so well in your book, to introduce it in a courtroom would paralyze a jury. It would end the court proceedings because of the constitutional protection of freedom of religion, and it strains the credulity of people who just really don't want to believe that it would take place. Because of the problems faced in the justice system and in law enforcement, social problem of mental concern arises, it is incumbent upon Christians who, A, believe in the power of God to set people free, B, have the ability to distinguish between psychological dysfunctionalism and satanic spirit manifestation. It is incumbent upon us as Christians to be the leaders in reaching out to these people, because if we don't, it's going to be tougher for people who don't have Christ to have the moral courage to do so. And that's why I appreciate so much your writing this book and taking this stand on this issue. Dr. Friesen, if we don't do it, who's going to?
That's why I wrote the book. People need to get involved. If good people do nothing, then you know who's going to be involved.
Mm-hmm. The book is called The Mystery of Multiple Personalities. Its shocking origin is surprising cures. It's by Here Life Publishers. And I, friend, strongly recommend that you get a copy of this book. Dr. Friesen, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
This is the end of the message. For further information regarding other topics available on cassette and in printed form, write Compassion Connection, Box 36C, Denver, Colorado, 80236.